wanted to first start off with a welcome. And so I'll say to you, good morning. We're very excited to have you here with us today. My name is Dr. Tiffany Butler, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Educational Equity in the Division of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, or DICE as we affectionately call it. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and welcome to Access Week 2022. For those who are new to Access Week, the aim of Access Week is to create campus awareness of the need for an equity mindset to help all students thrive in service of unlocking pathways to success. And so this year's theme is enacting beloved community, and we believe that we achieve this by serving students holistically. So this morning's Access Week event is the Equity Mindset Workshop with Dr. Micere Keels. We'll learn best practices and student success strategies, as well as provide insight to facilitate retention and increase timely degree completion for our students, using an equity mindset by creating a campus climate that strengthens environments for historically marginalized students. Today's workshop will be a facilitated conversation that will enable folks to consider and reconsider the idea of identity-neutral policies, programs, and spaces. We hope that you engage with us as we enter into a conversation about what equity can look like as we work with our students. On behalf of the entire DICE division, our Senior Vice President for Equity, Dr. Annabong Anna Branch, and the Educational Equity Group, welcome to Access Week 2022. We also want to provide you with a land acknowledgement, and so we acknowledge that the land on which we stand is the ancestral territory of the Lenape people. We pay respect to the indigenous peoples throughout the Lenape diaspora, past, present, and future, and honor those that have been historically and systematically disenfranchised. We also acknowledge that Rutgers University, as well as New Jersey, and also the United States as a nation, was founded upon the exclusions and erasures of indigenous peoples. And so if you'd like to learn more about our land acknowledgement, you can feel free to visit us at the website included on the screen. And lastly, we know that you could be a lot of places besides here, but you decided to come and be in community with us today. And so we wanted to just acknowledge that there are a lot of things going on. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, daily distractions, upcoming deadlines, things outside of the space that might be impacting you. And so we name that now, but we also thank you for being in community with us anyway. And so right now I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker. So Dr. Micere Keels is an associate professor in comparative human development at the University of Chicago. She focuses on understanding how race, ethnicity, and poverty structure the supports and challenges that children and youth experience. Her longitudinal study of over 500 Black and Latinx students who entered college in 2013 has resulted in several articles, policy reports, and recently a published book. The book defines and discusses how campus counterspaces enable students of a given marginalized identity to gather, validate, and critique their experiences with the larger institution and develop counter-narratives that challenge dominant representations and notions concerning their marginalized identities. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Micere Keels.
So I'm thankful. Thank you guys for bringing me back again for a second time to have much more of a workshop discussion today. Whereas the last time, November, maybe I'm thinking, that I was able to be in this kind of virtual space with you, it was kind of just presenting some information and things that we had learned through our work with undergraduates in the project that we did. And so I know that that recording is there and available to you guys. And really the goal in this context, in this space, is to facilitate you guys having a discussion with each other that will hopefully end with some greater collective understanding of how to think about some of these things, and possibly, hopefully, if everything goes well, ending by beginning a conversation around ways that you guys can collectively work together to advance many of the things that you guys want to do on your campus with regards to equity and inclusion and belonging and all of those things. So I'm only going to be talking little bits here and there in between several facilitated discussions that we have planned. And so essentially the goal is for you guys to dive in. You know, the rules where we kind of talk about step forward and contributing your voice to the space and the discussion, because we need as many voices as possible, and then also stepping back in order to be able to listen to the voices and perspectives of others. And assume that there are going to be times when people are going to make mistakes in what they say and what they communicate. And when that happens, or when you perceive something in a way where you're not sure what the motivations are behind that or what that person actually means, is to be curious and to ask more so that we can get to a space where we have greater common understanding. With that, let's jump in and go to the next slide. So the reason that this one is here is, and the citations at the bottom, it comes from The Complexity of Identity, Who Am I? By Beverly Daniel Tatum, who tremendous scholar in helping us understand all of these aspects of identity. The idea and the title is, like I said, creating a virtuous cycle where all of the different pieces of the messages that students hear about themselves and that are communicated in all of these different ways contribute to a positive sense of themselves as a student on your campus, and that there is no gaps or separation between their various social identities, such as, gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, any of those things, that those are all parts and pieces of themselves that they can celebrate on your campus and contributes to and is part of their academic identity. And essentially, so it's these pieces like, who did my parents tell me that I am? That's how you get some of your early messages and throughout your life. And then you get those messages from your peers. Who do my peers say that I am? And based on who my peers are, who do I think that I am? Because these are the people that I associate with. What is reflected to me in the faces and voices of my educators? Because K-12, you're spending a lot of time with those people as well as college. And do you see yourself reflected in them and in what they say, and as well as others? How am I missing from the cultural images around me? Do I see myself and my culture reflected anywhere in my educational spaces, in my community, where I live? What the media tells me about myself? And in this context, it really should be social media, because that's essentially for youth, how they consume everything in the media these days. It's no longer that like that TV box or anything like that, but all of the different social media forms and streaming services, and even now like the streaming games and things like that, tells them messages about themselves. And then lastly, how am I represented in the cultural images around me? So there's one at the bottom that says, am I missing from those? But when I am represented in cultural images, are those positive images? And the one in the middle basically showing that all of these things communicate to me 24/7 in overt and in covert ways, implicit and explicit ways. They convey information to me about who I am. And all of those things can either create this positive cycle when we're thinking about academic identity, positive cycle of all of these things communicate messages that you can and are able to succeed in academic spaces, and also in particular in your campus's academic space. Or for many students, unfortunately, many of these messages, they don't see themselves in they don't see themselves oftentimes in academic spaces, positive messages about these things about themselves. And then also in your particular academic space, they don't see themselves positively represented in many of these images. And so there's a tension and a fight between their sense of self and all the messages that they get about themselves and their student or their academic identity. And we'll go to the next slide. And so that academic identity is students' beliefs about themselves as learners, as belonging to your particular educational institution, and beliefs about the importance of schooling for their futures. So for some students, all of those identity messages are positive for these aspects of their academic identity. But for some students, many of those messages are negative when it comes to their academic identity. And also the aspect of many historically marginalized students have had to fight to maintain kind of like a positive academic identity in their K-12 spaces, which means that they come to college with a very vulnerable academic identity and very vulnerable to threat. And I'll give you one example from a family friend that recently just happened. She's my goddaughter, and her mother is a high school teacher. Her grandmother is a surgical nurse. My goddaughter is smarter than anybody I know, smarter than me. She, a year early, did AP everything through high school, graduated a year early and ready to kind of go on to college. But we thought she was a little young, so she's still going to do that last year and take just some extra AP courses just for fun, because that's the kid that she is. And as she was applying to college, her high school guidance counselor, and she wants to be a pediatric oncologist, said, well, you know, that's actually a little tough. That's really difficult. It takes a lot of schooling. Remember, I said AP everything a year early, would have graduated and ready to go on to college, and said, you know, that's really tough. Are you sure you want to do that? You know, your grandmother is a nurse, so let's look at nursing programs that you should apply to. And because kids take in these messages, and even though everything about her academic career and preparation to that point should have had that girl saying in that meeting with that guidance counselor, absolutely not. That is not what I want for my future. I know what I want for my future and where I want to go. When she got that message back about, well, you know, that's going to be really tough. Are you sure you want to do that? Let's go for nursing. Her response when she got home that night was to talk with her mom and say, okay, I don't think it's going to work out for me to be a pediatric oncologist. Can we schedule a meeting with grandma so I can find out more about maybe becoming a nurse? And so then we had to do a lot of work, identity work, and well-being and sense of self-worth to put her back on that path that she had been working on since junior high. And if you want to go to the next, just click the next slide, that's this aspect of identity threats. Experiences that challenge the value, meanings, or enactments of some aspect of identity. So she has now experienced the significant threat to her academic identity. So when she goes into college next year, she's actually entering that space really vulnerable to potential negative messages about herself. And so it's just this aspect of, we need to keep in mind that some students come to college having been validated throughout their whole lives for their academic identity, and other students have had to really fight to maintain a positive sense of their academic identity. And so they don't all come to college with the same level of strength in their sense of selves as students. And so these things, things we've learned in our study and many others, is that persistence, much of the difference in persistence in students is not about their academic preparation, but how much they have been validated. And so they can then withstand threats to their academic identity when they experience a bad grade or a bad test. You know, they see it as just a blip, and they can really bounce back really quickly. And others, when they experience a bad grade or a bad test, it really hits at their heart and they become even more vulnerable, and their persistence is threatened. So that's kind of just that framing and setup that I wanted to put for why all of this matters so much. Go to the next slide. And so what I'm actually going to ask us to engage in is discussing a counterintuitive example of getting us to think about just how much identity threat matters for students' well-being and how intensely people react to potential threats to their identity. And you can go to the next slide. And our counterintuitive example is the backlash against critical race theory being taught in K-12 schools. And we'll get to what I'm asking you, what I'll ask you guys to reflect on and discuss. So this is a Republican parent, and that was important part of their identification for the statement that they made around their resistance to the possibility of critical race theory being taught in schools. And it's just, the quote is, schools should teach about systemic racism in a way that avoids making white children feel like they're being singled out by emphasizing mistakes made in the past. So this is a Republican parent who is willing to consider the, so they're not all the way on that spectrum of saying schools shouldn't teach about race and racism. They're saying, yes, schools should teach about systemic racism, but their pushback against it is because they're concerned about their child's sense of self and identity. And you can go to the next slide. And so what I want you guys to do is thinking about white American pushback and resistance to critical race theory as another lens and way into thinking about just how vulnerable people are and just how much fear is builds up in people and distress happens around the aspect of harming someone's identity or sense of self. And the reason I use this one as an example is because I think if you don't understand another's perspective and what is underlying their thoughts and beliefs about something, then it's really hard to work with them or move forward. And so for me, the pushback against critical race theory, I really looked to try to understand, even if I disagree with their pushback, I want to know what is under it. And for me, I see at the core of what's under it is many of the same things of what's underlying the pushback that historically marginalized students give in their campus spaces for what they want to see differently. The reason I picked this quote is because I agree with the parent in that schools should teach about things in ways that don't make any particular group of students feel singled out and feel shame for who they are. So, and we can, well, first, let's be real, nobody's teaching critical race theory in K-12 schools, but if they were, they could absolutely teach it and teach about race and racism in ways that don't make white students feel shame or harm for being white. Same thing goes for many aspects of college campuses when we think about historically marginalized students, and which is what the rest of the session will be about, thinking about, well, what are all of the messages that are coming from historically white institutions that historically marginalized students are receiving that might be making them feel threatened about their identity. But we'll get into that by first thinking about and getting a sense of, well, what's at the core? What's underneath this backlash to critical race theory? So you can go to the next slide. So here's what I want you to think about first. Just think to yourself for 2 minutes. I'll have my little timer. And the question I'm asking you is, what does a tremendous anxiety and backlash against the very possibility of critical race theory being taught in K-12 schools reveal about people's sensitivity to identity threat? So I want to give you 2 minutes just to think about, what does it reveal about how sensitive people are to identity threat? And just one more minute. I really want you guys to think about this one. Then about 20 seconds, we'll send you out to discuss with a random pair this issue of just how sensitive it is, the messages that kids might receive and do receive about themselves in educational spaces. Which then implies the care that we need to take about the messages that they receive. Okay, so we can send you out into your paired, where you can just share with each other what this has brought up for you and what you're thinking. Did you open the breakout room? Okay.
Yes, everyone's been assigned to their breakout room.
Okay. And so what I'm asking now are just thoughts. Just the goal for the next 6 minutes is just to share a little bit of the discussion that you guys, thoughts that you had to yourselves, and the discussion that you had with another around this issue that I had posted. I'm just open for any comments. Who's going to be the brave first one?
I'll go. I'm new, so I've only been at Rutgers 6 weeks, and I'm really excited to be here. But we talked a little bit about thinking about that quote and how much it really reveals that white people are so used to being the default, that once we start hearing, oh my gosh, there are other stories out there, that it causes anxiety, like, oh my gosh, and so I just think a lot of people don't even want to grapple with the fact, and so they project their own shame onto the kids.
Hello.
We could have used a lot more time, sorry.
I know.
We were having a good conversation.
Oh,
yeah.
I know.
I see a hand up by Veronica Armour. I believe I'm saying that properly. If you want to go ahead.
Yep. You got it. So when I saw that, I think about how it's, perceived as, that identity threat, because it goes against how the narrative that we tell about ourselves, especially the American narrative that is, as Anne said, default white, about being bootstrappers and how we, pick ourselves up by our bootstraps. And a lot of times, even, while this isn't directly related to race, it goes to the intersectionality of it. When you talk to people who make different wages or different salaries, and those that make a higher salary, well, I work hard, as if, the person who doesn't make as much doesn't work hard, and there's that. And so when talking about critical race theory, it challenges that notion of like that, so this wasn't all in their control. It wasn't all by their doing, and really direct. And it is a direct challenge to that notion of who they are, that they've not had to grapple with before.
And then Lisette?
Yeah.
Hi. So we talked about how it really makes people have to be in a position of accountability. And sometimes being accountable can be difficult because not everybody, like, it acts the same way. Just because a group of people maybe generalizes act a certain way doesn't mean that everybody in that group does. And so it highlights the lack of accountability on the part of some people, because sometimes in just being in a certain position, there's power in that, right? And there's power in having different people who don't look like you advocating for the things that you're not able to access. And then we also talked about how it becomes a power struggle in a way, because some people don't want to let go of their piece of the pie because they think if I let go of this, then that person's getting another piece. But in reality, what critical race theory creates is a system for people to have equal pieces of the pie. So we're talking about what that looks like for people in our group. That was basically our group discussion. I don't know if anybody else in the group is saying anything, but yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. And Claudio?
Yes, I was thinking as soon as I saw the quote of our last president opening up his campaign attacking Mexicans and the effect that had in Mexican kids in our community, how they felt attacking their parents, right? And how some of them said, well, I'm American. It's like, but where's your father or your mother from? Oh, they're from Mexico and you're not from Mexico? That's awesome, right? Like how we develop this kind of identity to protect ourselves. So I was thinking like how that also can, with or without reason to kids that feel attacked or whatever. And how King also, Dr. King when he talked about poverty, how he included everyone, right? Like in this idea that whatever affects me is also affecting you. It doesn't matter if you live in a tower on the 18th floor, at some point, that's gonna touch you. So, and also the idea of working, we had an event on Tuesday, and the presenter was amazing when she said that we have to work with those that want to work with us, right? Like, how can we build bridges constantly and create partnerships? Because the only way we're going to advance is working with others, right? Not alienating other people. I mean, we had other stuff to say, and I forgot. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Just to kind of add to what Claudia was, we did talk more specifically about the impact on the child because it's K through 12. And once this information is taught, it becomes like it's a risky thing because it could challenge their foundation, and they're already trying to become young adults. So once that's challenged, we were just saying, well, will there be some type of counseling or some protection? Once this exposure, if they don't know, then you have to actually, that you have to care for like the child, and we hope that would be available once you get into this very complicated topic, because we don't know how they're going to react and how they're going to interact with students of different colors. So that's what we were really focused on, the well-being of the child too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Shorna?
When you asked that question, I created more questions for me, but it made the impact of, as a person who works with students, who, when you said, I'm just sharing this, when you said that persistence is not about an academic record, but how much validation a student gets coming in, that puts a lot of responsibility to say, okay, because we tell students like, you have the academic record to get into this university, so you're capable, right? But then I don't always think about, okay, every student with this high academic record, the level of, I won't know what level of validation they've gotten or received. And so when you're in a classroom, you're not necessarily thinking how sensitive they are. And so when you ask that question, I was like, oh my goodness, the sensitivity is high and people attach certain things to their identity that I might not think, is attached to your identity. I might not think that but I have had a different history of validation from people than you have. So I'm going to respond differently. So it brought the weight. I felt the weight of it as a person who works with students all the time and not making assumptions and thinking about, when we're teaching a diversity class, are we allowing students to all be validated in some way? Are we losing some? Is some going to be? And so, your question made me grapple with a lot of things. I don't have the answers, but it made me question some things and think about it.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say one quick thing and then go to Engelbert. You can see it in the moments when students withdraw. And you can see it in the moments when they stop making eye contact. There are lots of kind of like bodily and emotional change tones which are the moments where they may not even realize an aspect of their vulnerability and their fragility in this academic space has been touched. And it's just because that's the way our brains and our bodies work. When our vulnerabilities get triggered, we're like, ooh, something happened there. And it changes physiologically. Engelbert.
That comment for Cheryl made me think of it related to what our group spoke about and thinking about the concern with the frailty of, let's say, the white children of hearing these messages that may impact their identity or their group in comparison to the disregard for the identity and the messages, almost like Claudio was mentioning, around children of color, that we constantly hear these negative messages and stereotypes, stereotype threats, but there's no concern or regard for that. So I'm thinking about critical race theory, talking about, okay, how do we erase some of these things and bring some of the things to light? The focus is on the frailty of the Anglo-white community, and not on the impact that this has had, or how we could kind of sort of take that sensitivity and be more sensitive to how systemic racism is impacting the identity of children of color overall. So it just made me think about that, kind of sort of that disconnect.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. And Dean.
Yeah, so just to kind of expand on that, what it brought up for me was just the complete, what Engelbert was saying was with that complete lack of recognition that there's a different side to the sphere. That if you're standing over here on looking at it from this one side, there's a whole nother side that you're not seeing. And sort of being able to, when you're standing in a place of privilege where your story is the story that's told, to ask somebody to turn the page, or just turn the sphere. We'll keep it nice and round and even. Turn the sphere, just to look at it from a slightly different angle can seem very unsettling when you're used to looking at a very flat picture. So that sort of that's that threat to identity, which is actually revealing, I've always had my story told. Why are you going to change my story? With that lack of seeing how other people have had to deal with that all along.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for digging into this conversation. It's all of those things. And all of those things are the reasons why being able to kind of surface all of those thoughts and ideas, the reasons why it's important to look at, like, okay, what is it that you guys are seeing over there that you're reacting to and responding to, and how can I understand that? And as I was doing that, I was like, although it would take probably many days of workshops, but my thought was, ooh, if you guys could only understand, that's what these historically marginalized students have been fighting for so long, to say, when you talk about us and our story, we want you to have care for how it's affecting our identity. For me, I was like, you guys are kind of saying the same thing in different, and I was like, oh, but I don't even know how to possibly start that conversation. But I wanted to have that with you guys to say, because I'm sure there are those in your space where I know there are those in my university space who are just not supportive of the idea of safe spaces for historically marginalized students. And this is a way of possibly getting them to think, well, but what is it that those parents, when they were concerned that that there might be something that could threaten their kid's sense of self, they reacted so strongly. Whereas these other kids, they've had that their entire life, and they're simply now in college saying, as we go about being here in college, as you go about teaching classes, as you go about selecting curricula, we want you to think about how we are included, because it affects how we see ourselves. So we can go back to the slide deck. And so this is just a couple of slides from the last presentation, just to bring back a couple of key important things. You can go to the next one, which was just the idea. One of the things that I said last time was it's important to separate diversity, tolerance, and inclusion. Diversity is your recruitment and who's on campus, who are you recruiting, how are you getting them there. Tolerance is once they're on campus, making sure that they are not actively engaging in harmful interactions and hostility towards members of legally protected groups. But then inclusion, which is how do we actually foster and leverage interpersonal interactions among and across a broad range of status and identity groups to strengthen campus belonging. So inclusion, you can bring them there, you can make sure that they are not engaging in harmful activities, but then at the third step, you have to say, well, what are the active ways that we are ensuring that positive interactions are happening? And then you can go to the next slide. And I'll jump to the inclusion goals, which is how can we build the skills necessary for faculty to create and engage students in diverse learning environments. They're in college to learn. They're in college because they have to go to these classes. So one of the spaces that students have to be in is they have to be in classrooms. And so it's critical that we do a lot of work to support faculty to reflect on whether their curricula enables historically marginalized students to see themselves among those people who are producing knowledge. Because when you can see yourself in those who are producing knowledge and the knowledge is valuable, you can see yourself in the institution and succeeding in the institution. And then how can we increase the range of opportunities that enable individuals from historically marginalized groups to see themselves in the culture represented in the constellation of old and new traditions that comprise the culture of the institution. One example that I give is just the idea that it's 24/7. Kids are getting campus messages about whether I belong here and whether I can succeed here. And if you think over the course of a day, it matters what is the name, what are the names on the dorms that they're waking up in? What are the picture and the cultural artifacts and the music and things like that they hear in communal spaces in the dorms that they're in? When they leave and they get their backpacks on and they're going across campus, what are the names on the building? What are the pictures of those who have succeeded at this institution that are in the buildings that they're walking on? Do they see themselves represented anywhere? When they go into and out of the library, do they get checked just a little bit differently than others to make sure, are you really a student here? All of those little messages signal belonging and acceptance. And it also brings down or increases their guard for how much they're going to engage in this institution. And you can go to the next one. So this is more, it's again, it's from the last one. It's there. I'm just gonna kind of say just really quick, dimensions of inclusion that the messages the students get is communications. So, and what I said about this is an example for the communications dimension. So the kind of quick example is the brochures and the information that's communicated. Is it one that kind of says, I really love that you guys do the historical lands opening to presentation. It kind of says that you recognize that there are groups that have been excluded, and that what is here now wasn't always here now. And when students ask other things, when they want to get other information, when they want to know what is the history of this institution, when it comes to excluding groups like me, some institutions make it really hard for students to get that information, and others make it much easier. Some institutions have these kind of repositories and ongoing information where students can get that, and others, institutions, make it seem like we've always been perfect, we've always been open and inclusive. And so then there's also policy and practice, academic dimension, as I mentioned, their classroom spaces, social dimension. Are the social spaces segregated or integrated? It's really critical that administrators, as you're going through your campus, are the social spaces on your campus segregated or integrated? And oftentimes, the social spaces on campus are fairly segregated. And that tells you that there's work that has to be done to actively create opportunities for integrated social activities, facilitated integrated social activities on campus. And I will go to the next one because I really want to get you guys into discussion again. And yeah, you can go to the next one. So this is, sorry, when it transferred into, from PowerPoint into Zoom, it went back to like, so this is 19% and 17%. So this is the undergraduate enrollment 2019, before the pandemic. Who knows? We have to wait a couple of years for things to settle again. But the enrollment fall 2019 at your institution, undergraduate, 19% white, 17% white men, 17% white women. And then the next slide is 15% Asian men, 14% Asian women. And then the next slide, Hispanic men, Hispanic women. And then lastly, Black men and Black women. And it is the aspect of being in that among Hispanic and Black students, and in particularly Black students, you're really sandwiched, and you are such a small percent of the campus that can feel in and of itself. We call this demographic marginalization. So just being in such a small percentage minority of the campus, that as you go about many of your spaces, many of your curricular spaces, your classrooms, and you're walking around and across campus, you don't see many others like yourself. And so you're often feeling this aspect of demographic marginalization, of representing your whole group. If I say anything, I'm automatically singled out. Before anything even happened, just walking in and sitting in the classroom and looking around and realizing I'm the only Black student in this class. that creates a narrative that's happening in the students' minds, that then anything that they do after that in that class feels like a bright spotlight. And so again, it's really critical to think about how are we actively creating moments and spaces and places and artifacts that validate these students, because demographic marginalization in and of itself is an invalidating experience. And they're unlikely to see themselves in the faculty also as they move around. And all of those things matter for this feeling of oppression. And so the next slide, what I want you guys to think about is, what are some of the many aspects of campus policies, programs, spaces, and cultural artifacts that signal who is valued, who belongs, and whose culture is prioritized? And what you're doing here is thinking about what are the many different ways and things that students implicitly, without saying anything, as you're engaging and interacting as a student with campus and campus life, that can signal whose culture, who belongs, and whose culture is prioritized. Because then you can go back and look at those things as you are moving through campus, and then intentionally think about, how can we add to this to ensure that we increase the diversity of students who can feel valued, belonging, and prioritized. And so I want you to just think to yourself for 2 minutes around, what are the many things that students could be interacting with through campus and campus life in curricular and co-curricular spaces that communicate these things. And then you can go back and check some of those things to see, oh, well, maybe there is only 1 or 2 groups that are represented in these things, and then discuss and think about, how can we add to the groups who are represented in these things and in these artifacts. And so think to yourself for 2 minutes, and then I want you to post in the chat your thoughts and ideas for about 5 minutes, so that you are posting yours and you're reading others, and then we're going to reflect and discuss for a little bit. So here's your 2 minutes to think and post it into the chat, and then we're going to read others. So you have 2 minutes. And let me know if you have any questions about what the question is. So please now post into the chat some of the things and thoughts that came up for you, so that we can read them and have a record of them to, like I said, go back and think about looking at some of those things. Oh, was that?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has the option, but I put it right into the chat.
Okay, so if you got, we can just talk about them if you guys don't have chat access.
Yeah, so for right now, it's direct messaging into me, and so
Okay,
for
okay.
now, if you want to continue to write, I can share them out loud. If you want to write and not say it out loud, but if we could transition into just speaking it out loud, that would also
Yeah.
be great.
So we'll do stop screen share, sharing the slides so we can all come back in.
There we go.
And so then we'll raise our hands and share our thoughts. What's that? Oh, everyone can chat now.
Okay, well, I was gonna say, you could look at the fraternity houses that are on campus, the different cultural spaces that are on campus, how big those spaces are, as well.
And so while others of you are getting ready to comment or post into the chat, one thing I'll say with that is also to think about those fraternity houses. And I don't know what it is on your campus. The spaces designated to multicultural groups or diverse student groups and things like that. Sometimes those spaces are fairly neutral, and they shouldn't be. In the sense that I've had some context where some students have been like, I know this is the multicultural or diverse students space, but as a space, it's actually a fairly neutrally decorated space. And so those spaces should be quite clear that as soon as you walk into that space, exactly what the range of cultural diversity and things that are represented in that space.
We have a few folks posting in the chat.
And so just give us the time to post our things in the chat and then read those of others. And I want to wait just a couple minutes more to see more examples get posted into the chat, and then we'll talk about some of them. Okay, so let's talk about the names on scholarships. And that came up, where's my thing? Here it is. It's actually an issue with a colleague of mine who works in another university, and she's works in diversity. And it was actually there were endowments they were soliciting endowments for what was going to be their new multicultural student center. And the largest actually potential endowment they got from that was actually coming from a white family. And they ended up deciding to not go in that direction because part of what that family wanted was to have that space named after them. And so it was this issue of, yes, this may end up being the multicultural student space, but the experience that students might have walking into and out of that space, named for this family, and then the pictures of those family members on the entrance as you enter into that building would kind of negate some of what they were trying to create in and with this space. So really thinking about many of those things. And so then, who gives endowments and money and things like that for scholarships? And then they are named after those individuals. And so those messages around who succeeds here through all of those things. And at my own institution, one of the centers that I'm affiliated with was Center for Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. When we were thinking of a new student and faculty award, one of the things that we decided is that it's going to be separated. Who funds that award was actually going to actively be separated from the name that was going to be on the award. And so whomever funded it was going to have to be okay with that. And that's the only way we were going to accept those funds, so that it could be named after a faculty member of color who had had significant achievements. And again, keeping in line with diversifying whose names are on these different prestigious awards. So really important things to bring up. Amy, I'll let you share before we go back to another one of the things that was posted in the chat.
Thank you. I think about language. And so we're situated in a largely Spanish speaking community. And like everything we do is in English. And yet a lot of people from that community work here, like, in different capacities, and even just like we're doing work with the Afghan refugees, and just the number of languages, like, so they're asking us like, okay, do you have people who speak Urdu? Do you have people? And we, the fact that like there's so many languages here, like, isn't celebrated as much as I think it could be, and affirmed and utilized. And so, when you're asking like what is valued, like what I think of like what's not valued, and that is like bilingualism, like how are we, just only always grounding everything in English, and like how can we think about, reaching constituencies outside of the university? And if you're a parent who doesn't speak English, like what are we communicating to you when, like, about your child belonging here if we don't like make efforts in different languages? So that's just something that I was thinking about when we were discussing.
And that's great student work to do that translation. It's not only great student work, it's also validating work, validating them for that cultural fund of knowledge that they're bringing with them. And so that is an excellent way to utilize students, engage students, and validate them all at the same time. So absolutely. Lisette, did you have another comment? Because your hand is still up. I just want to make sure.
No, I just forgot to take it down. Sorry.
No, I just want to make sure. Thank you. And my comments keep disappearing. The chat keeps disappearing. Okay, there we go. Student hesitancy with career fears. Really critically important. And I don't know if you guys have that at your institution, the aspect of the closet, like the professional attire closet, that students who don't have those things can either take or rent and give back. Rent meaning just take it and give it back and you guys clean it. As part of that aspect of, you know, I'm not quite sure what it is on Zoom, if they just need the top half, but some point we'll be back in person and they'll need the top and bottom half. But yeah, some institutions are doing that in order to help students facilitate engagement in those things, because of that, of looking around and seeing, wait, who's showing up to these career fairs? And why are there some groups of students that aren't showing up to those career fairs? And doing some surveys and asking, and the aspect of, well, I just didn't feel like I had anything that made me feel presentable when I saw how some of my peer students were kind of getting dressed up and going. And then that hesitancy from that. So really thinking about how that's communicated and what's the implicit message about what's required to show up to a career fair and how you should be. Building learning systems that require the latest computer technology. I was absolutely guilty of that 1 year, and then I quickly switched and changed, where making assumption regarding the laptop that students would be able to bring with them to class. And 1 year I just, because it was convenient for me and I thought it would be more engaging for students, switched everything in a way such that from day one, like you really needed to walk in with your laptop in class, and enabled me to kind of, it was easier to bring more interactivity and engaging pieces to the work. But then now at my institution, most students do. But about 5 years ago when I first did it, there were 2 students where I was like, on the first day, I was like, ooh, I made an assumption that they were going to be able to walk in equally with the technological access at their fingertips for the computer that they had, and realizing that a couple of them were actually, in terms of the computer, were going to be on iPads. And so then needing to really quickly rethink what I was going to do, rather to ensure that they weren't left out, or felt like they were the only 2 students that were going to have to like lean over on somebody else's. And that act of, you might think, oh, well, you 2 just partner up. That actually, for that student that doesn't have that technology, is now for them every class a anxiety that they're walking in with. And so really thinking about how these things affect how those students see themselves. So yeah, there are so many of these things that we need to think about intentionally, in the ways that we don't, and we just assume that these are kind of, that there are no identity pieces attached to these things, and it's just kind of, these are curricular things, and that our curricular things are it's just about teaching and learning. It's not but it's so much of it, all of it includes some component of, it's sending me an implicit message that I either do or don't belong. Just tiny little implicit messages. And the thing is that students get those little implicit messages all day long. And so they're either incrementally feeling a greater sense of belonging, or incrementally feeling a greater sense of alienation from the campus. And then I want to ask any additional final comments before we go on. And so, oh, Dean, yes.
So, I mean, that was obviously my comment. I think that we also need to consider not just the small impacts it might have in terms of a student's identity, but actually the real impact in terms of performance. So if a student can't access the material to be able to do their work because of the particular systems that we're using, maybe they only own a Chromebook. That's what they have. And for a family that's already struggling to pay for education and to cover all of their costs, you know, to be arriving at the university and being told, well, now you need to go buy this other $2,000 piece of equipment or $1,500 piece of equipment. I think it, you know, we need to be cognizant of the economic impacts and how not just for students who are coming from a challenged economic background, but students from all economic backgrounds where the additional expenditure, we can't make the assumption that that can be built in, you know, because that's not included with their financial aid. That's not included with any other funding that they might receive. And then, you know, I've had students who have then felt like they needed to go out and work to be able to go make the money, to buy the piece of equipment they needed to be successful, and then missed 4 weeks of class. That's actually a real example because they went to go work a job so they could buy a computer that would work for their math class. So that's the kind of stuff I think that we need to be really cognizant of how the system is setting students up to fail. In addition to causing them to feel like they don't belong here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things, it's in a, a report that we did, but there's also a chapter in the book on, I can't remember which chapter, I remember which co-author it is with, but it's on the financial belonging piece of it. And one of our very first findings that we did in a report, our first year, that we were not expecting was financial factors. And it wasn't the amount of money, it was the amount of distress associated with the financial factor. Because for one student, $500 is a ton of distress, not having that $500. Whereas for another student, it takes closer to $2,000 for them to get to that level of distress. So it was about the amount of distress they were having over the financial factors that was the biggest overriding aspect of their sense of belonging on campus. And so we ended up, for all of the kind of other analyses that we did, even when we looked at like academic microaggressions, we had to control for financial distress because financial distress swamped everything else in their depression, stress, and sense of belonging. And also in their perception that they will persist academically. Financial distress swamped that also. And we found that it took only 3 questions, I'm trying to remember what the 3 questions were, to assess their financial distress. And it was like, do I worry that lack of money will keep me from enrolling next semester? Is there someone that I can go to assist with a financial shortfall? And the other one was like, do you stay up worrying about money? So it was it wasn't the amount, because it's different amounts for different people, but it was how much am I worrying about it? And do I have somebody that I can go to for help with tangible help, financial factors? And if they were high on financial distress, they started to withdraw their attachment and in belonging and engagement with the campus because it's uncertain. Well, if I don't know if I'm going to be here, I don't want to invest as much. And so one of the things that we found is that that was then undermining how engaged they were in academics. Because again, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pay next semester or next year. So I'm kind of sabotaging, they're not intentionally, but they were sabotaging themselves with some of their academic stuff. Again, it's a protecting myself I'm becoming too engaged and invested in this, and then I no longer have the money to continue. Well, now there's this, I've invested so much of my identity in being a student and I can't continue. And so it was really undermining their belonging and engagement. It was really amazing how much that financial distress piece swamped everything else. And so we ended up having to control it whenever we looked at anything else that was happening for students on campus. So yeah, there's huge pieces of belonging that are associated with having the money to be a student.
There was one comment in the chat that came as a direct message that I'll share now, is about the financial aid system. As you're talking about financial aid, that colleges take advantage of students and the requirements around some of the loans students have to take out.
And I will put this to you guys. It is in that report that we did, one of the things that we said, that this is actually something that universities have complete control over, the extent to which they make their financial information disclosures to students transparent in the award documents. There's nothing that says that the university's financial award document has to be difficult to parse. There's also nothing that is forcing them to make it clear and transparent. But it is something that universities can take complete control over, ensuring that those documents can be parsed and read easily, and students can clearly understand, like, what's a loan, which of this is a grant, which of it is this, which of it is that, and so that they can come in and not suddenly feel hoodwinked, which is what some of them feel about what happened with that. So yeah, that is something that universities can take complete control over. And also, it can be done early in the process, that financial literacy and information. And the other piece that I will say, and then I'll get off the financial pieces of it, that is one of the things that we found was, and I'm certain it's every campus, but you guys have lots of first generation students on campus in majors. We found it for things like they were in architecture, they were in, bioengineering, they were in all of these majors where literally all you have to do is graduate and you will get a good job. And they were absolutely distressed. I'm going to end up working at Starbucks. I'm never going to be able to get a job to pay off my loan. And these were our kids that were in engineering, pre-med, all of these, but because they didn't have family and networks that could give them the information that, no, you're okay, just stick with it, this will pay off. They were very vulnerable to all of those messages around college not being worth it. And they were very vulnerable to, I'm going to be that kid where I'm going to invest in all of these loans and never going to be okay. And when we first got these, we read all these, we asked them open question. Our question was, what is your worry? After we asked them everything else, we said, what is your lingering worry that we have not assessed? It was an open-ended question. And this dump of it's not going to be worth it. I'm going to end up with all these loans. I'm not going to be able to pay off. And they, some of them did have loans that were accumulating. And we thought, oh, so these are probably all of our history majors or art majors. Didn't matter. These were engineering, med, pre-med, our architecture, everything. And it's just because they didn't have the family network where they could see that this does pay off. And again, it affected their sense of belonging on campus because they were so worried. And again, that is something that universities can completely help to make more transparent the career pathway. That students, that the majors that you're in, how this works into a career and how this works for you long term. But if we assume that all students are coming in equally with their knowledge about this process of college, we don't do that. We just assume, well, you're here, you must know where you're going, but they don't. So many of them don't. So I'm off that soapbox. And we can share screen again. And I'm going to go through this piece really quick because the slides are there, but this is kind of pulling from the book. Go to the next slide. And the idea here is just reflecting and reminding, if the campus as a whole is not generally validating for me, because as a historically marginalized student, then one of the things that can be helpful, it's not for all students. So I always also say this, there are going to be lots of, for example, Black students who may not want to be in the Black Students Association, and they're going to find their campus belonging in a different association or a different group, and that has to be validated. But for some of them, students who experience stereotyping, discrimination, and alienation appear to feel a greater sense of institutional connectedness when they participate in campus counter spaces. So some students, many of them, where they do feel discrimination and alienation in the general space, when they engage and connect through cultural spaces or identity spaces, if they can feel a strong sense of campus belonging in those smaller spaces, they then begin to generalize that feeling and that sense of belonging to the institution as a whole. And they become more engaged in other spaces in the institution. Once they have this small space where they can feel support, connectedness, and belonging, it strengthens their ability to go out and engage in those other spaces where they don't feel it as much. You can go to the next slide. And there are, you can go to the next slide, a couple different types of counter spaces. One is physical. And so this is a student, a Latina student who, she said, you know, I always felt like I was the only one in class, only Latina students in class. And so I wouldn't want to talk in class. And then I think halfway through her first year, she bumped into the a Mexican co-ed fraternity, joined that fraternity. And once she got that sense of connectedness and belonging through that Mexican co-ed fraternity, she got that sense of belonging, and it strengthened her sense of connectedness and willingness to be a little bit more bold in those class spaces where she felt like she was the only one. So those physical counter spaces matter, which is just physical space, meaning it's a physical space where when I go there, I see others like myself. So I know there's places on campus where I can go and I have a high chance of bumping into other people like myself. And when you're just 2 and 3% of the campus, you don't see yourself everywhere. You can go to the next one. Social counter spaces, and I use a counter example. So this was a Black female student talking about when she got to this campus, her and connected with a couple other Black friends, and they were like, we're going to go out and just go all in with engaging in, this was like rush week time, and go out to all of these fraternities and sororities and just check them all out. And most of them at their campus were white fraternities and sororities. And there's much more to this quote, but essentially there was a ton of hurt when they went to all these white fraternities and sororities and the parties that they were having, and they kept getting turned away. And I'll read the quote, which is, the frats weren't Black people, they were white. We would go to the parties and they would be like, sorry, we're not letting any more people in. Then they would let white students in. We would be like, oh no, that's bogus. For real, that's pretty racist. But at the end of the day, we just dealt with it. And so many of the social spaces on these campuses are unmarked as white spaces, which means it is the Future Entrepreneurs of America Club. I'm just randomly taking something. Future Entrepreneurs of America Club. And when you go into that club as a historically marginalized student in that meeting, you go in, you look around and you're like, there's nobody else like me in this club. That's an unmarked white space. You're going to withdraw and retreat and look for social spaces where you can see others like yourself. And you can go to the next one. Ideological counter spaces. This might be more of like kind of a politically leaning, activist leaning organization on campus that is actively fighting for minority and marginalized rights. And I'll just skip past the quote, it'll be there, you guys will have the slides, but just say that there are these different types of counter spaces that all bolster students' sense of connectedness to campus. They're finding it in a small space, and if they can find it and build it, they will then extend that sense of belonging to the broader campus. You can go to the next one. So the question there is just, are racial and ethnic counter spaces divisive spaces that some people claim? And the answer is only if the culture of the institution presents racial ethnic minority students with a false choice, which is that you are either a student on campus or a Black student on campus. And you either choose to associate with the Black Students Association or you choose to associate with the whole campus. Some students feel like that's the choice that they are given, but we need to understand that it is actually a much more fluid process of going between majority and minority spaces, and we should encourage wholeheartedly these safe spaces, and it can be, it's LGBTQIA spaces and all of those other space identity spaces. And if we support and encourage those, they build strength there and they transition and extend that strength to majority spaces. You can go to the next one. And so I want you to quickly go through a change framework for thinking about your individual and collective roles in advancing equity and change, and then move you guys into small breakout rooms where you can think about and begin to brainstorm some ideas for change. So go to the next one. And the reason this is here is because you're always working on two, personal and institutional. Myself included, we all have our biases, we all have our blind spots. And so as you are advancing your personal growth in equity and the things that you do and the ways that you perceive and the ways that you respond, you will be stronger in your ability to contribute to institutional change. And next slide. So the personal change framework is reflecting on your role in perpetuating systemic bias. And the statement there is me, you, all of us individually do something can improve in what we personally do in perpetuating systemic bias. So you have to reflect on that with that intentional reflection on what am I doing? What are small ways? What are things that I can do? It may not be on race, it may be on gender, it may be on sexual identity and orientation, it may be on gender identity and orientation, it may be religious affiliation. There are there are things where each of us carry bias. And so once you can identify something in some area where you need to improve, then it is, what is your role? What is some small action that you can personally take in the things that you do to break down some aspect of systemic bias? And then how can you cultivate a few allies around that? And then how can you take action to advance change? So regardless of what might be happening at the institutional level, there's always something that each of us can do to improve ourselves and then work with a few others to make change. We're going to focus on the next one, which is institutional change, but it has to be done with the idea that there's always something that we need to personally do. And the breakout is going to be thinking about the first two elements of institutional change. And the institutional change framework is set a clear intention for change. So we can't change everything, and much more likely to get somewhere if we have something small and clear that we can work towards. Once you do that, the next thing that you're doing is looking for institutional data to identify gaps in outcomes. So the more that you can take to and have discussions with your colleagues where you have data, where you have numbers to show, there is a gap. There is something that here that these objective numbers show that we need to work on. And then once you have that, collecting additional quantitative and qualitative data to diagnose accurately and understand the problem. So now you need to know, well, how are students, or if it's a faculty recruitment and retention thing or something else, how are those individuals experiencing it through additional survey information, and just getting more than just those institutional numbers, because we can't look at it just from our perspective. And then discussing with others to challenge and deconstruct our understanding of the underlying problem. And then identifying ways of changing policies, procedures, and practices to advance equity. And remember, we've started with a clear, concrete area that we want to move. We're not changing the whole campus all at once. But in that, after doing all those steps, we want to identify really clear policies, procedures, and practices. And those things have to be linked to measurable change outcomes. So that's kind of like the institutional change framework. And in the citation in the notes for this slide, it has like the book that this comes from. And then you can go to the next slide. And this is just here from my website from the book. This is a particular page that has an inclusion guidance report. And at the end of it, it has several different accountability metrics. And so it's something that you guys can go back to and look at. At the end of it, it has, and it's at like the administrative level, all the way down at the faculty level, the student level, what metrics might look like when you want to be really clear and accountable with different aspects of inclusion. All right, and now we're at our discussion, I hope. On the next slide, yes. So we're gonna put you guys into, we're not gonna think to self for 2 minutes. We're just gonna put you into small groups for, because I really wanna give you 10 minutes. I'm gonna put in 10 minutes in your small groups. And I just really want you to discuss around what is one aspect of campus life, curricular or co-curricular, that could be improved to strengthen historically marginalized students' identity. You have to also think clearly about which groups of students. It could be along issues of race, ethnicity, religious affiliation, sexual identity and orientation, gender identity and orientation. It could be immigration status, and could be many different social identities that you want to focus on. What I will say, do not do one of the things that I saw our institution did a while ago that was a complete fail, because they had I don't even remember what the name of it, but they put racial, ethnic, low income, and first generation students into one group as if they had like the same challenge or issue and did not parse the specific fact, that one group of students may actually need something different. So low income, first generation white students are going to need to have a different conversation and supports and resources than immigrant, Black students where the parents actually had decent and high level of education, but they may not know the American system. And so to think critically about the group of students that you would want to support and target, and then lead with data. So after you think about the first question, what institutional data do you think you could reach out for to try to get a clear picture of the challenges that you could then begin as the starting point for this conversation? So I want to, I am dropping those things in the chat so you can think as we're dropping this into the chat. And because I want you to have it in the chat with you as you go into the breakout rooms.
Oh, Brooke has the message. They're in the breakout rooms.
Oh.
They opened all up. Sorry.
No. So you can do it through the, what is that? Okay. So really just want to, as we kind of close out, get a little bit of sharing out of your kind of final thoughts about the things that you guys discussed. What are the thoughts and ideas that came up? Who's
I guess Amy, I'll speak. Shauna Berkeley here. Amy was one of the people who looked. She was right, Amy. I'm just seeing you on my screen. But our conversation led back to more looking at the institutions addressing one of the major issues that exists right now in terms of addressing mental health. And what could we make an intentional change to kind of see that improved? And Amy, please fill in if I missed something. But we talked about, maybe calling for CAPS, which is our Counseling and Psychological Services Office, to have a more diverse or have some representation in their staff. And secondly, in terms of, I guess, maybe, I can't quote the data, but leading with data in terms of like, I think sometimes students listen to other students a little bit more than they may listen to the quote unquote staff who are considered adults. So maybe including students' voices there to, say what are some of the reasons or in some way or form that they go to, to feel included in what's being offered there, to feel like they're getting supported so that students could feel like this is a safe place for me to go. I'm not always sure. Based off of my interactions, as students feel like that's a safe, inclusive space to go to address mental health issues that they're being faced. And I think in terms of specific groups, we couldn't figure out a specific groups because they really can help all students and in different ways, but to look at what you're saying about inclusion for first generation, which have, perceivable different feelings about addressing mental health, immigrants and students with immigrant parents. I can think of undocumented students, LGBTQ, and all, different groups have different, really there should be some representation and something that helps each of these groups feel included in addressing some of the things that are actually part, I mean, between your 18 and 21, there's a lot going on at that age. So I think it's perfectly normal, but I don't think we are normalizing that as much as we should in terms of mental health, and not to mention with COVID, that's a whole other issue in itself. Amy, did I cover everything? Just making sure.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about like how we at the university, you know, our job is to expand students' minds, right? And so we offer them all of these possibilities and you can do all these things. And then they go home to their parents who say, you need to be an engineer, a business person, a lawyer, or a doctor. And then we leave the students to navigate like all of these conflicts with their families. And we leave them with that. So we talked about like, you know, how can we kind of support that?
Absolutely. And it's I don't know if you have looked at the data for your campus, but it would be critical, I think, to look at campus demographics versus students who enter and take advantage and utilize mental health services, as well as students who may do an initial reach out and go for a first session versus continuing and following up sessions. And the general information that we have is that students of color and other historically marginalized groups have higher levels of anxiety and depression in college and significantly lower rates of utilization of any mental health services on campus. And so you have this huge gap in that they have more of a need, but yes, less utilization of those services. And having some of those numbers can really help your mental health office, student services think about partnering with other off-campus organizations, because reality is it's unlikely that they have the diversity in their staff to be able to meet this need. But what they can do is then partner with other off-campus organizations that community mental health centers and things like that, that might have that diversity in order to help meet some of that need. And if students are feeling like my campus is the place that's contributing to my poor mental health, it can feel threatening to use the campus mental health services. And so again, if it's through referral to and reimbursement with a community mental health organization, some of those things might help improve utilization. So yeah, it's really thinking through and problematizing some of this, using data to get a sense of it, and then being creative about what else we can do. And I want to make sure that I give Tiffany time to finish and close up. Thank you guys so much. It's been really great facilitating this conversation with you.
So I want to say thank you so much to Dr. Keels for coming and sharing with us this afternoon. I thank you to everyone who's on the call and endured with us for these couple of hours to really engage with the material and to come away with some things that we can use in our own practice. So again, thank you for everyone who's on the call. I'd also like to encourage you to fill out our evaluation survey. And so I'm going to go ahead and put that into the chat. So please go ahead and click the link and let us know kind of some of the things that you've learned, some things that you might like to see for next time, because it helps us to figure out what we're going to be planning and those types of things. So again, thank you so much for your time and attention, and we look forward to seeing you maybe at the next event. So tomorrow we have our last, or one of our last Access Week events at the Faculty Research Highlight at 11. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out maybe to one of the DICE staff. We can get you in on the registration. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Keels, and thank you so much to everyone on the call. Have a great afternoon. Bye.